That fall I enrolled in Westminster Theological Seminary, and I loved it. In my second year, I was fortunate to have Dr. Douglas Green, who challenged the class to think outside of the rigid ways the opening chapters of Genesis are traditionally interpreted. I was both shocked and intrigued by how much latitude he seemed to suggest there was in how we understood the text. I tend not to think in black and white terms, so the amount of liberty he took was fascinating and freeing to me. I was particularly interested because I had often felt that a strictly literal interpretation of the entire creation story strained credulity, but I did not feel there was room within orthodoxy to question it too much. One of Dr. Green's assignments invited students to review and critique the work of his former colleague, Dr. Peter Enns, who used to teach at Westminster but had been let go because of his Christotelic hermeneutic. By comparison, his views on Genesis made Professor Green's musings seem rather vanilla. In my review, with my limited knowledge and unlimited zeal, I tore Enns' book, The Evolution of Adam, to shreds. I even bragged about it to my biblical Hebrew language professor, Dr. Mike Kelly, who kindly informed me that Pete is still a good man and dear friend with whom I just had dinner last night. Imagine my embarrassment. But I remember wondering how their friendship could be so well maintained if Enns was so off base that the seminary would not retain him. Also, how could someone who was able to secure a position at theologically conservative Westminster for 15 years go so far off the deep end? Later, it dawned on me that Dr. Kelly did not say that Pete was wrong. In fact, he encouraged me to read the publications that influenced his friend to rethink things. Might there be some justification for the views he put forth in his book? Was there any validity to his concerns? But how could there be? Enns was motivated by the theory of evolution to deny the historicity of Adam and the correctness of Paul's teaching in Romans 5. Yet, he was driven by his theological commitments to still accept the universality of mankind's sinful condition and the need for Jesus to save us all from that condition. His conclusions did not seem to make sense on a theological level. But also, the problem he was addressing was not a real one to me because, as a typical evangelical, I had been conditioned to dismiss out of hand anything that took macroevolution too seriously. And yet, while I did not share Enns' scientific concerns, I was forced to acknowledge that there were several questions that arise from a plain reading of the Genesis creation accounts that I had no real answers for, and had long since ceased to even search for any. But why was that? It was not that I didn't care to ask or search. Rather, I always told myself that there were smarter people who study at a deeper level and read the biblical text in Hebrew, so they understand these issues better than I ever will. Let them answer those questions and write commentaries for the rest of us. But then it dawned on me that I was now studying under and having lunch with some of those men and women, and could ask them these questions myself. The easiest way to respond to these questions is to allow that parts of Genesis were meant to be taken figuratively. But this does not completely satisfy, because we need at least some portions of the narrative to be literal since later biblical passages depend upon them. How, then, do we know which parts to take literally and which figuratively? And how do we know that we are not simply picking and choosing based on our theological commitments, or whatever survives the latest scientific findings? Notice that there was no specific concern for evolution in my initial list of questions. However, if Peter Enns was responding to legitimate scientific discoveries, then not only could I add evolution, but it would also begin to explain why these questions were on my list in the first place. That is, because something else, and not the Bible's origin story, was true.